Obviously, Provost Regina Knight is a character of massive importance in the story. And having seen it now, I can't imagine anybody doing a more sincere and stellar job than Phyllis Logan. Is her character also based on a real person, or is that another consolidation?
She did a beautiful job. She really conveyed it. And it was a bit of a composite in that, when I wrote this years ago, I was at Oriel College, which had only just started admitting women like a few years before I arrived. So my provosts were men who spoke very much to me. I had actually some very amazing Christian provost figures, decanal figures in that. But she's a bit of a composite of another female professor that was very, very influential for me. And they decided to just sort of update the provost so that would be a female figure to kind of help make things maybe a little bit more modern. It was the same as the texting as opposed to emailing. This is how old I am. I'm very old, Dave. Kent and I are very old, David, in the sense of we were learning email at the time, so they updated some of those things. But yes, very much conveying, as I said before, Christians, even in these professorial roles, decanal roles, whatnot, that were highly educated, very intelligent people who lived real lives and shared their faith and were hospitable and generous and gracious and open to conversation and did things like paid attention to you, saw their students. And in that little way that we're seen in those ways is a reminder of how we're seen in bigger ways.
How important is it in your mind and in the grand scheme of your story, the realization that it wasn't only effort that made you what you were and what you are? I can't remember who said the line in the film, but it was so embellic to me of the story and the script as a whole.
Well, I think it was a turning point for me that when I really had to sit and face what grace is, that it's not karma, and thank God it's not. Else we'd all have coming back at us the tsunamis we deserve, and that we can work so hard and never really hit the mark. And what actually is the etymology of the word sin? A marksmanship, and in that there's a gravity. At first, with grace, it's a very difficult, even an off-putting, really awful thing to have to face, this sort of shortcomingness and that we could never measure up. But on the other hand, there's a great relief and beauty in the fact that I can rest in that. And that can sound like such a difficult leap, but it really frees you. It's the same as that you can't do it for anyone else too. It has to be just yourself. We don't stand before our Lord and say, what about the other guy? Right. That's one of the first things we see in Genesis. It explains everything, right? So it's about our own hearts before God. And we have to answer for our own hearts and live from there. And so grace, the concept of grace just blew every category I had in which I was going to be self-sufficient and controlling and able to make everything work. And that doesn't work.
Would you say you felt your way into your faith, or was it more an intellectual journey, a combination of both? I know it's not the same for everybody.
Well, I think it's a combination of both, and then a tertium aliquid, right? As Colette says, there's a third thing. There's a Holy Ghost thing. And so, yes, it was thinking for me. For some people, it's not. Thinking for me was really important. That was a form of a way, I think, another love language between God and I, but also that I think our thoughts are proof of grace themselves, David, that, there's not a bubble over our heads like a cartoon where I can see what you're thinking and vice versa. That's incredible proof of grace. But that was important for me. And so was feeling to some degree as well. And how we toss that word around in lieu of thinking. But I love the metaphysical poets, John Donne and whatnot, as I referred to in the movie, the idea that you can think a feeling and feel a thought, not to separate those so much, and that there's something, a third thing, a mystery, something that we can't discern fully, nor are we able to, nor should we, right? I don't want a God I can put in a box, but I also, there is a mystery to things, and that's not a cop-out answer.
One thing I think the film captures well is the intersection of beauty with questions of truth. And we touched upon it a little bit earlier. What relationship do you see between beauty and questions of truth, or beauty and intellect, or intellect and truth for that matter?
Such a beautiful question. It really is. I mean, there's a whole
you can talk about it for hours.
Right?
So give me your 2-minute version.
Here we go. I think for myself, it's that the truth makes things beautiful. It's when I used to think before I was a believer, those old canned phrases of, oh, the truth will set you free. Oh my goodness, what an eye roll, right? But it does. And those roots lie too deep for frost, right? As Tolkien says. And when you are in relationship in truth with someone out of love, out of fellowship, it's incredibly beautiful. It really has very little to do with how we judge things in our world physically or whatnot. That truth and the truth of God's love for us and the truth in the gospel and living in that truth makes everything beautiful, makes things beautiful.
When you were at Oxford and even throughout the rest of your educational, teaching, and administrative careers in high academia, we talked about how you found yourself, around people of faith that kind of surprised you. But of course, you have to be surrounded also by, I need proof to believe people, as you were one of them. And if, in being surrounded by them at times, how did you go, or how did you not go about things with them?
I think that all conversations, all ideas, all things, in many ways, sometimes actually the greatest doubts expressed push me more towards the faith, in the sense of there's no fear in them. I think and I think we tried to portray that in the film, many ways when people are having one night stands or, drinking and super drunk, and it's not a heavy-handed judgment issue. It's just, what are you looking for? And I think in many ways, actually, sometimes what atheists or agnostics were saying to me, I think about some of my atheist friends who genuinely would speak to me and care. I thought, I want something better. I want something more. Or sometimes, we're so reluctant to trade the best when we have what we think is good. And being comfortable can actually make us even more disinterested. I mean, you get to a place where there's nothing, all those other conversations help. They, if anything, remind us that we're in this journey all together.
And where I was kind of going with that, I think, was along the lines of, maybe a better question would have been, what do you say or don't say to non-believers, or perhaps those who are faith curious, whom have difficulty reconciling faith with a need for proof or science? Or do they just simply have to find it as part of their own journey?
No, it's great. And I entirely understand that. I've been there too. And
yeah.
And there's moments of consolation and desolation. What I find really fascinating about science is it really isn't at odds. The discoveries and things like that are happening. I don't actually, less and less, I don't see how science is at odds with faith. And I used to really compartmentalize those and think that, science absolutely discredited it. But of course, there's an expanding universe. I mean, that's not at odds at all with the Judeo-Christian concept of God, right? Like there's the ways our bodies work, everything that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. None of these things are at odds. If they are, look into them, ask questions, see for yourself if they decrease or increase your wonder.
There's also this intersection of two romances, a divine and an earthly. What do you make of the intersection of those two things in your story?
Well, you ask great questions, Dave.
Well, part of it's me, part of it's my assistant producer too. I have to give Kyle some credit.
Well, Kyle, I'll turn this one on you one day. But I think I know for me.
By the way, we have about 3 or 4 Kyle questions coming up. So
I can't wait to Kyle for a pint. I think, I think that romance, for instance, the whole idea of being in love with somebody or pursuing somebody or being attracted to somebody opens up such vulnerabilities for us, right? And it really is, though, a template for our relationship with God. But that relationship, I used to be really freaked out by the notion of people calling the church and his bride. And I thought all those things were super creepy. And then when I became a believer, I realized how that marriage metaphor was so important, because once you're a Christian, you are married in a sense, regardless if you're single or married, you're married to Christ, like in the sense that you're taking all your decisions and thoughts in that to that relationship and living your life very differently. And I think it's just so important to have that relationship first and foremost. And so instead of looking for somebody else to fill that place. And so where the earthly connected for me was, I was hesitant. I wasn't going to trust in an earthly father. So I wasn't going to trust in an eternal one. That was a big issue for me. But when I began to pull the threads apart and see that, it's a shame to throw the baby out with the baptism water, right? Just because I have issues with Christianity or Christians or fathers or whatever, in this way, am I actually going to throw the whole kit caboodle out? And that doesn't make any sense either. What is it that is true?
We're living in a new age now. Some call it a post-truth world or metamodernism or whatever it is that comes after postmodernism in our cultural history. What do you think your story has to say to our cultural moment in time? And that is a Kyle question.
Cheers, Kyle.
Yeah.
Well, everything's a post, right? Everything's a post. Post everything.
Yeah.
Basically been post-lapsarian. So I think I hope that it would just speak really privately to people, that they experience the beauty and the transcendence of seeing Oxford and England and the cinematography that's lovely in a theater, right, David? But that they also would have those bigger questions settle on themselves. That when they leave the theater, they can sit between themselves and their soul to be able to ask those kind of questions. I think in our society, we're so distracted, so busy, so tinging and binging and pinging and whatnot, right? It's, like an opening scene of Monty Python. What are we actually giving birth to, And there's, it's not that we always have to be walking around serious as monks, but are we doing the good work? Are we doing this good work in ourselves? What are we really living for? And how are we living, and what will come out of that for ourselves and for other people? And I would hope that it would just be able to give people the ability to have that kind of conversation with themselves, as well as with their friends or anyone else they want to talk about the movie with.
Caro, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, David. Absolutely, for me too. It's been joyful in every way and a foretaste of heaven.
Well, I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carolyn Weber.
Thank you.